You've probably heard this one before.
You should only use legacy controls. It is objectively superior in every way compared to standard controls.
Or,
only bad players are clickers.
Not to mention a whole slew of expectations in regards to HUD choices, where your hotbars are, how big they are, what things you have on your screen and where you have them, and so on. In this video, I want to explore some of these options and choices and discuss how they affect your gameplay, positively or negatively, so you can make the choice for yourself if you should change anything. Before I begin, however, I would like to say that I subscribe to the idea that as long as you can do what you want to do and you don't feel impeded by the way you play, then there is no requirement to change. But if you start thinking that something is too hard to do or that you can't do something, which can be because of your control scheme, UI or otherwise, then that is a reason to consider changing something. Now, let's start with the classic argument: legacy controls versus standard controls. First, standard controls means that your movement keys react based on the way your character is facing, meaning that pressing forward moves your character forward based on where they are facing, and you can turn left and right. You can also strafe to keep looking in a certain direction while moving sideways, even if this is a niche interaction. It also enables you to backpedal, which is equivalent in move speed to walking. Additionally, if you hold right-click on a mouse, you can essentially take control of the exact angle your character is facing at any time. This can allow you to turn to face away from something, however, that can also lead to your cast failing. This hold right-click option also allows you to very quickly turn your character to face any direction you need. However, if you play on a gamepad of some sort, you will instead experience standard controls as so-called tank controls, as you will only be able to turn at a fixed pace, which does create a massive disadvantage in using standard controls on a gamepad. Legacy controls instead root your movement in the position of your camera, and also removes the ability to turn the camera with the keyboard, aside from the arrow keys specifically intended to turn the camera. Meaning that if you run forward, your character will immediately snap to run in the direction that corresponds to forward based on your camera position. Notably, legacy controls will turn your character to run in the direction you press, regardless of what that is. Meaning that on standard controls, pressing S, the default key for moving backwards, will have you backpedaling, while on legacy controls, it will turn your character and run toward the camera. Given that you rarely ever actually need to walk backwards in the middle of a fight, many players will claim that legacy controls are objectively superior to standard controls. However, I would like to propose that each control scheme actually comes with its own benefits, and the primary reason why a lot of players see legacy controls as superior is because its benefits are more widely applicable in a combat situation. Legacy controls give you easier control of the movement of your character, as you can run full speed in any direction you desire. If for some reason you need access to the backpedaling speed, you can always press the walk toggle. Standard controls instead give you easier control of the facing of your character. Uniquely, standard controls allow you to turn your character while you are in the middle of a cast. Legacy controls cannot turn your character without moving your character or starting an action. This leads to a very specific trick unique to standard controls in that, if you stand close enough to an enemy, you can actually cast a spell without even facing the enemy, allowing you to finish your spell cast while simultaneously avoiding a gaze mechanic. On the other hand, legacy controls giving you more easy control of the movement direction of your character is helpful in dealing with boss mechanics, playing on a gamepad, and in some capacity doing jumping puzzles and the like, since you can just face your camera however you like to get the best view, and then move accordingly. Where, at best, standard controls can use strafing for a similar but probably inferior experience. In other words, standard controls gives the player access to do certain things that can only be done with standard controls. However, these things are extremely niche at best and completely unnecessary at worst. Meanwhile, legacy controls make a lot of things easier to do, and these things happen to be things that you do all the time. A random example would be kiting mobs, which involves running away and just turning for a moment to shoot at the enemy. Both control schemes can do this, but with standard, you must face your camera away from the enemy at all times, so you can just use right click to face away after every cast. Legacy controls you can do whatever as long as you press the correct movement key. Despite all this, the core thing is that as legacy controls doesn't enable you to do things that standard controls cannot do, it can be hard to sell someone who prefers standard controls on legacy controls. My best advice on this subject is use the control scheme that works best for what you're trying to accomplish, and at least try the alternative so you can tell what the difference is. Unless you play on a gamepad, in which case, legacy controls only. I don't recommend turning slowly like that. Next, the clicker versus keybinds argument. This is, of course, a keyboard and mouse thing. A significant amount of players choose to play Final Fantasy XIV using their mouse to press most or all of their actions. It is generally considered superior to use keybinds for most or all of your actions. However, it should be stated that anything you want to accomplish in Final Fantasy XIV can be done while being a clicker. Now, with that said, why is it considered superior to not press your actions with your mouse? Well, in an MMO like this, your mouse will undoubtedly be responsible for both the camera position and targeting in general, with the keyboard only really being able to alleviate it a bit by keyboard turning, standard controls only, or tap targeting, which is often considered not as effective in some cases. Additionally, you can also use the mouse for the movement itself, although it is a bit limited. Meanwhile, the keyboard typically gets the responsibility of movement, which, remember, the mouse can also do. This means that which one you use to press your actions depends on your preference, you could say, but why would the keyboard be considered the superior option? With the keyboard, you can bind any action you like to a single physical button or a combination of buttons on your keyboard, and simply press that at any time to perform it. When done well, your keybinds are all or mostly within reach of your left hand, or right hand if you're right-handed, and even if they aren't, you don't have to have your hand on WASD all the time, since your mouse also can control movement if you need it, and does so almost as well as the keyboard does. On the other hand, it is probably more about freeing up the mouse to do the other things it does better, and when pressing actions with the cursor on your screen, you need to keep track of where the cursor is on your screen, and most people will have to have at least a glance at the cursor to be able to press the correct button they plan to. Which means that clicking your actions this way may also take the attention of your eyes, which you need to look for fireballs flying your general direction and stuff, and knowing whether you're targeting the right person and so on. The reason for this is that the cursor existing on the screen means there's no tactile feedback of any sort. You can't feel where the cursor is, you can only see it. Combine this with the fact that many jobs have quite busy burst sequences where you have to press a specific button around every 0.8 seconds or so for several seconds. Given that your buttons are potentially much more distant from each other on the screen than they can be on your keyboard, you will be required to be a lot more smart about where you place the buttons in relation to when you use what. Additionally, since your cursor is occupied pressing actions, and presumably your eyes are occupied looking at your cursor, let's hope you don't have to change target during this time frame. Anyway, as I said, you can do all content in Final Fantasy XIV as a clicker, so you don't have to change if you don't want to. After all, as long as you don't feel like you're unable to do things in the game, you're fine. However, unlike the legacy standard controls argument, I can't really see an outright benefit to clicking for the average player. You could perhaps compare it to using a hammer with your offhand. If you learn to do it with that hand, it will absolutely feel easier to do it with that hand. But if you learn it again with your main hand, there's a very good chance you will be able to use the hammer even more easily. Even if it feels awkward at first when learning, I highly recommend introducing some keybinds for some of your most used actions, like your fillers and 1-2-3 combos. Then you can always add more as you like. The plan is mostly to reduce the amount of work your mouse has to do, and Speaking of mouse work, that also means that I don't recommend putting all of your keybinds on your mouse if you use like an MMO mouse with a thumb grid, since that can also make it awkward to use your mouse for its other purposes at times. The point is to not overload the mouse with responsibility. This then nicely leads into the conversation about specific HUD choices. And this one very heavily is focused on the whole "you only need to change if it's causing you trouble" thing. However, with that said, I want to list a few HUD choices that commonly can cause problems without people realizing it. This first one goes out to those with everything keybound, shoving your hotbars off into a corner and making them weirdly small. While this looks very nice and frees up space, you actually need those hotbars to keep track of your cooldowns. At the very least, add a hotbar closer to the center of the screen where your eyes are that keeps track of your most important cooldowns. That way you don't miss those. The second one is the party list in Narnia. You need to be able to easily glance at your party list if you have any supporting actions. Just to be clear, the jobs that don't have any supporting actions whatsoever, or actions that target other party members directly for that matter, are as follows: Samurai and Ninja. All other jobs have a reason to at least look at the party list sometimes, so it might be detrimental to throw the party list away into Narnia. Often, when I hear from people that they forget to raise people, like as a red mage or summoner, it is very common that it is because their party list is, like, all the way over in Narnia, as I said, and they aren't looking at it at all. I simply recommend moving it a bit closer, maybe make it a bit bigger, and see if it helps you. Number 3 is important things to track over in outer space. Having your job gauge far off to the top right, the default position for who knows why, or having your buffs and debuffs, and even your target bar honestly, up in the top of your screen, might not always be the best. Ultimately, this depends on how often you feel comfortable checking these things. For example, the pace at which the monk rotation goes can give you very little space to check your buffs and debuffs whenever you need to. And the flexibility of the rotation means you would have to check quite often. The recommended thing to do here is to move some of these things to the bottom of your screen, where your HP, MP, and hotbars usually are found. This applies for your job gauges, your buffs and your debuffs applied, and perhaps even the target bar itself, so that you only have to look at one place to find your status. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, but wait, Kai, you don't do all this yourself. And you're right. I am not having issues tracking these things, which circles back to what I said at the start. As long as you can do what you want to do and you don't feel impeded by the way you play, then there is no need or requirement to change. And this applies to everything I went over in this video. With that said, if you have suggestions or advice to give for, general settings that can make life a bit easier for others, that maybe you discovered yourself or someone taught you, do be sure to share them in the comments. I would love to hear about a trick I don't know yet. And that is all for this video. Thank you so much for watching. If you want to support me and my channel, you can let the YouTube algorithm know by liking the video, leaving a comment, subscribing, sharing, and hitting the bell to get notified when next I post a video. And if you want to give even more support than that, you can also become a member of the channel like these wonderful people here. Fun fact, if you prefer to control the movement of your character by pressing both mouse buttons, then standard and legacy controls are actually the same, with the exception being that on standard, holding right click allows you to turn your character while standing. Legacy controls do not allow this. This is also what gives rise to that niche benefit of standard controls being able to face away from something in the middle of a cast.